Yeah.
Mike in Bournemouth, thanks for waiting.
Hi, Matt and Martin.
Yeah.
Nice to...
Am I coming through all right?
Yes,
you sound you sound a lot clearer. All the callers have sounded clearer than we do today, frankly. You got a lot of echo today. But anyway, thank you, yes.
Okay, so my question is whether the holding of irrational beliefs or expectations can ever be justified. And basically, if so, whether a belief in a God can ever be justified. So my argument, if I can call it that, is essentially that there are many things that come as a result of an irrational belief, and not all of them are entirely undesirable. So,
right.
For example, love is often an irrational state to be in when most relationships end in failure. A person starting a business often has an irrational vision of its future when most businesses are doomed to failure. I don't know. Essentially, it comes down to two things. In the grand scheme of things, our lives can often seem pointless, and experiences can often be so arduous that it might justify believing in a God just to get to the next day, which will hopefully be better. Or the second thing, which is the lack of a belief in a God, could take away something from life. So I don't know. An example that I thought about was I remember my first relationship. I was I sat down with my girlfriend at that point and said, "Look, let's be realistic here. This is both our first relationships. Statistically speaking, the chances are we're going to break up."
Not necessarily romantic date talk there, but that's okay.
It reminds me very much of Tim mentions if I didn't have you.
Yeah.
I'd very likely have somebody else. So here's the thing. I think there's a way to frame this where you're basically saying that, oh, well, these are clearly not founded rational beliefs, and yet they may have positive results. I have no problem with measured rational optimism, okay? Because the big thing here is that statistically you start a new business and most of them are going to fail, but you have no good way of telling whether or not yours is going to be the business that is or isn't. And we do know that if you begin by thinking that it's going to fail, that this affects how you act, and you may in fact increase your chances of it failing. And if you are convinced that it's going to succeed, that may in fact be irrational based on the statistics. But you might be basing that on other things. For example, I don't care what the statistics are for businesses across the board. I care about the statistics that are relevant to the business that I'm entering and how well it's going to do. I think that my state of mind going into the business is relevant to how likely it is to succeed or not. So I don't necessarily think that it's irrational that we're actually talking about irrational things. I think what the examples that you're giving it are, we're making a decision in the face of the unknown, and we can either pay attention to statistics which may or may not accurately model what we're talking about, or we can look at all of the information we have and say, you know what, this is worth the risk, and I'm going to work towards it actually succeeding, and with the knowledge that I may in fact be wrong. It's much like, science, all positions are tentative and probabilistic, but that doesn't mean that, in the absence of perfect knowledge, that you're somehow being irrational.
And it's also the case, and this may be an aspect of just the human experience, that maybe a lot of atheists, don't take as seriously as we ought to, or at least aren't as willing to concede, which is, people are messy, right? I mean, the fact we have the capacity to be rational, thinkers, it doesn't mean we're going to be at all times, or even at most times. People do things, because it feels right. People do things because, maybe just for a little shot of happiness that might outweigh the risk of otherwise. And you can look at it in so many aspects of life. You can say, why do folks stay in a relationship that's clearly not the healthiest thing they could be in?
Because I love her. Leave me alone.
Why do people do X and Y, and why do people smoke and drink when they know it's unhealthy for them? Why so much stuff, and so we're not all these perfectly rational Vulcans, logicking our way through life, and that's fine, and to the extent that can apply to religion. I think it's P.Z. Myers once said, if religion was just like this private hobby like knitting, that the individual believer got pleasure out of, who cares? It's like do you really believe that you have an angel sitting on your shoulder, and whispering homilies to you, and are you a lonely person in your life, and that is a thing that sort of makes some of that go away? Hey, you do you, go for it. That's not, that's an aspect of it, and it comes down to a certain point. At what point do genuine negative things that start impacting the human race at large? That's where it all gets bad. That's where irrationality takes hold. That's when that's when damaging results. That's when you have the psychics who strip people's life savings because this person is ripe for exploitation because they miss their father or husband so much and all that kind of thing. So it's very easily treated.
I just don't think that it's fair to label them as necessarily irrational. Just because there's a possibility they could be wrong. Like if you're in an NBA game and you're the guy who gets pulled out of the stands to do the free throw or from half court for $1 million, you can stand there and hype yourself up and everything else, and that may or may not increase your chances. But I don't think that there's anything irrational about saying, hey, I'm going to throw this basketball in the general direction, and it's not impossible that it might go in.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go take out a loan based on whether or not I'm going to make the basket, but you can go for it. And when you're talking about things like relationships and businesses, I put those in that category. I don't think it's irrational to be optimistic.
Yeah.
It slightly didn't address the second part, which is there may be things that not believing in a God does take away from you and take away the enjoyment of.
So I've had an ongoing bet for years. If anybody can provide a real tangible benefit that can only be achieved by the truth of a religion and not through secular means.
I was about to actually give that as an example, and one of the things that I was that I thought that, for example, Christopher Hitchens perhaps never dealt with when he kept posing the question, name a moral act that a religious person can do that an unreligious person can't, which would be an element of complete self-sacrifice, a martyring of oneself for the probability or the possibility of doing something good that may be so small that it may be, unlike the case of a relationship or a business where at least there's some chance.
How did you determine that somebody couldn't do that?
Yeah, because I can think of an example right now where to refute that, but
there are atheists in foxholes, for example. Yeah. There are plenty of non-believers in military situations where they put their life at risk. And I don't necessarily know that we would call them martyrs, as that term might necessarily be religious, but Hitchens' thing was specifically about a moral act, but I'm talking about any actual positive benefit that's tied to the truth of the religion.
Yeah, like if you wanted to sort of take the Hunger Games scenario where it's like, oh, take me, not my baby sister, right? I can see a secular person, being that protective of a sibling that they would do that, and just that wouldn't necessarily take a theism to motivate you. I do think that the particular crisis you're talking about is a common thing that affects atheists who have deconverted from theism, and so that particular aspect of the theistic experience, this notion of being watched over and looked after by a protective parent figure, as it were, that's now been taken away, and there's a hole there, and so that can be a really difficult part of transitioning into secular life for a formerly very religious person. So that is a thing. That is, and people, I think, have to come to terms with it in different ways, and it takes a whole lot of time. I just had a buddy on Facebook ask this very question about this very situation. It's like, all right, he considers himself this sort of middle-of-the-road agnostic, not committed one way or the other, but he says, but I'm surrounded by the outspoken atheists in my life, all my friends. And so his question was, how do you deal? And he got to the nub of, this was the separator for him. It's like, how do you deal with the sense of futility? And so I'm like, all right, interesting. You're starting with the premise that without whatever this is, this assurance that theism provides, there will be a sense of futility. And I and quite a few other atheists responded to that by saying, I deal with it by not really having one, right? I understand that there will come a day when I will not exist, and there will be years hence when the world will be consumed by the sun and vanish in a puff of ash, and then the universe will go to heat death, and then nothing was ever had a point. But you know what? I can't do anything about that. What I can do about it is I'm here now. Maybe I've got a few decades of healthy life left. Going to make the best of them. Try to leave.
But the sense of futility illustrates a point that I've made before, which is that the problems and the positive benefits that religions get credit for primarily come from solving the problems that they invented in the first place by convincing people, oh, life is futile without God. They're convincing you, here's the thing that's wrong, and we're the only ones with the solution. When in fact, the thing that they're saying is wrong probably isn't. Yeah. If we taught people the facts about death and dealing with death and dying, the grieving process might change dramatically. And if people wouldn't be like, oh my gosh, how can you live not knowing that you're not believing that you're going to spend eternity in heaven? Because I don't have any good reason to think that it's true. And if I begin living my life as if that's not likely to happen, or I have no reason to think it's going to happen, all of a sudden I live my life better.
Yeah, this notion that these are all things that are introduced into your way of thinking and told that you cannot have a sense of fulfillment without them. But it's like, and what religion does is it insists that you have to, if you don't want to have a futile existence, be able to have a kind of impact on things that you cannot possibly have an impact on, like your own inevitable death, like the heat death of the universe, right? We can't do anything about the heat death of the universe. But, but if you are convinced it's like, oh, I can't do anything about the heat death of the universe, it's all going to end in nothingness anyway, life is futile. I think if someone's jerked your chain pretty badly and they've given you some unrealistic expectations of how high you should set the bar for your own sense of purpose, it's absurd.
On that note, Mike, I appreciate the call. We're going to try to get one more in before we're done.
But thanks for bringing it up. I mean, those are real issues, and thanks for bringing it up.